ופותחים בכבוד אכסניה. אני רוצה להודות את המארגנים של הכנס הזה, שדבר יפה מאוד, ואני מאוד מכובד שאני נמצא פה ושהוזמנתי. אני רוצה להודות לטובה גנצל שעושה כל העבודה הזאת של ארגון, ולפרופסור גואטה שמכיר אותי, ובוודאי הוא היה זה שהציע שאני אדבר פה. קודם כל, במסכת שקלים, רבן שמעון גמליאל אומר, לא עושים נפשות לצדיקים. Monuments are not made to the righteous because their words are their memory. On this occasion, we will discuss some of the works of Rabbi בן-אמוזג in which he deals with the defense of Torah שבעל פה, the oral Torah, our tradition. The works I will quote from extend from the beginning of Rabbi בן-אמוזג's activity as a publisher of Hebrew books in 1854 to his debates in the Italian Jewish press, such as Educatore Israelita and the Vesilio Israelitico in 1895. So we have 40 years of operations. I will quote from his commentary to the Torah, Sefat Emet, 1854, from his commentary on Pirkei Avot, 1855, from Tam Leshad, 1863, from the general introduction to all the books of the Torah שבעל פה, published in Hebrew in the journal HaLevanon between the years 1866 and 1868, from the article I benefici della tradizione, the benefits of the tradition, published in Educatore Israelita in 1868, from the opinion on the Samama will, 1882, from the book Cinque Conferenze sulla Pentecoste, 5 lectures on Shavuot, 1886, from the letter to Shadal, 1890, and finally from the polemics with Rabbi Eudeloli of Padova in Vesilio Israelitico in 1895. Professor Guglielmo Lattes, in his superb biography of Rabbi בן-אמוזג, published in 1901, wrote about the life, the works, and the ideological disagreement between Rabbi בן-אמוזג and Shmuel David Luzzatto. Lattes made excellent summaries of the main works of Rabbi בן-אמוזג. Many pages are dedicated to the Rav's work, Moral Juif et Moral Chrétienne, and to Israel et Humanité, Introduction. The biography was written shortly after the Rav's death and does not deal with some works in Hebrew and some of his writings in Italian, which may be more important for the contemporary reader. The topic of the defense of the oral Torah is also dealt only sparingly. In this paper, I will try to fill this gap. פנים לתורה, 1854, is a Perush of Rabbi בן-אמוזג לתורה. In 1854, at the age of 31, Rabbi בן-אמוזג announced the publication in his new printing house of the 5 books of the Torah in 465 pages, with this commentary פנים לתורה, in addition to the commentary of Rashi, שפתי חכמים, פני דוד of the Chidah, and a selection from the commentary Rat Moshe by Ram Moshe Alshich, Alshich HaKadosh. In פנים לתורה, in the Parasha Vayetze, Rabbi בן-אמוזג gives an explanation of Yaakov's vision of the ladder, making use of concepts taken from Maimonides and the Zohar. He explains that the meaning of the vision is a link and unity between the various components of the world. And he concludes, and there is no need to dwell on the works of the masters, and nothing that has not been affirmed and approved by the first master of Israel, may their memory be eternal, will come out of our mouth. This statement is a commitment which Rabbi בן-אמוזג kept until the end of his life. All his works and his teaching are marked by respect for the masters and for the oral Torah, the tradition. Commentary on Pirkei Avot, 1855. In 1855, Rabbi בן-אמוזג published the Haggadah entitled Chukat Pesach, 202 pages, with instruction in Hebrew for the Seder of Pesach, with the Arabic translation of the text of the Haggadah, and with new commentary on Pirkei Avot entitled Avot Ugvurot. The commentary includes teaching from the Rav Chidah and from the Derashot Binah Leitim, Barav Azaria Pijo, and other authors. Pirkei Avot are studied between Pesach and Shavuot. In introduction, Rabbi בן-אמוזג cites a few reasons for this minhag, from his custom. One reason is the value of the holiday of Shavuot, the day when the Torah was given, to warn the people, not even think the obligation to observe the teaching received from Moshe Rabbeinu that were not written in the Torah are secondary, and that we must observe only what is expressly written in the Torah. The reason why we study this Mishnayot is that they list the chain of tradition from the beginning with the words Moshe Kibel Torah Misinai. Moshe received the Torah from Sinai. In this way, when we arrive at the day the Torah was given, we are committed to observe the Torah along with the explanation given by tradition. Tam Leshad, Shadal published his Vikuach on the Kabbalah in 1852. In this book, Shadal argued that the Kabbalah was a foreign body in the Jewish tradition. Professor Lattes, in his biography, Rabbi Ben-Amozeg, writes that in 1857, Rabbi Ben-Amozeg was 34 years old when he began to support the reasons of Kabbalah. Later, Lattes wrote that Ben-Amozeg did not want to continue to turn his attention to philological questions because he said, what is the point of dressing up in front of the mirror when the house burns? Jewish Italy in the mid-19th century was subject to social phenomena similar to those in other European Jewish communities, with the abandonment of Jewish studies by a large percentage of the Jewish population in search of a better life after the opening of the ghettos. Heterodox opinions, those against Kabbalah, and even those in favor of reform, took hold. In his correspondence with Shadal, Rabbi Ben-Amozeg was cordial but very critical. In one of the letters to Shadal he wrote, if you do not realize it, let me prediction be in vain, you will be the Mendelssohn of our century in Italy and in the rest of Europe. Why do you want to lay in the mind of the people the fatal germ that will bear bitter fruits? Perhaps when neither you nor I will be in the world anymore to cry and to make up for it. Don't you see the first signs? Don't you see on which side are the reformist ambitions? From yours or mine? I mean, from those who deny the Kabbalah as you do, or from those who accept it? If in 1863, when this letter was written, Rabbi Ben-Amozeg still has some hope of convincing Shadal of his reasons, in 1894, 29 years after Shadal's death, and after the publication of Shadal Epistolary, 1882 in Hebrew and 1890 in French and Latin, that surprised, quote, that surprised and grieved everybody, in an exchange of articles on the Basilis Relitico with Deo de Lolli, Rabbi of Padua, Rabbi Ben-Amozeg wrote without euphemism what he thought of Shadal, who tampered with the biblical text when it seemed proper to him, that he rejected traditional interpretation when he thought and wished so, who taught that the tradition had not been written in order to be able to change it more easily, thereby denying its divine origin and its immutability. Two cornerstones, it seems to me, Mr. Rabbi, of a rabbinic faith. And in another letter to Lolli, he wrote, what remains to be known, what fruits the anti-Kabbalism produces, we can look for it together in the letters of Luzzatto. As for the Kabbalah, Rabbi Ben-Amozeg stated, quote, it is certainly Judaism of Nachmanides, of Arizbaz, Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, the Judaism of all Israel, also according to your school for more than a millennium, according to my school, since God revealed himself, and therefore we are legitimate owners, and all the burden of proof belongs to you. And you will have to work up a sweat to convince all Israel of having erred for more than a millennium, and especially in Italy, up to the Riformatori dello Studio di Padua. This is a game on words. Riformatori di Padua were the censors, the Christian censors. But he used reformists of the Studio of Padua. The reformists were the Bet Midrash Rabbanim of Shadal, he means, with the author of the Vikuach at his head. A dispute that had begun to defend the antiquity of the Kabbalah had expanded and became a war for the defense of the Torah. In 1895, when he was 72 years old, Rabbi Ben-Amozeg wrote that he had recognized the unorthodox ideas of Shadal since 1848, with these words, quote, what other fire lay beneath those ashes, now you can see, and I foresaw it at age 25 in my thesis for my first rabbinic degree. All this is taken from the Italian Jewish press. In 1895 he stated, for the direct proof of the harmony between theosophy, Kabbalah, and the written oral law, I gave it in my writings for 40 years. In Emat Mafgia, in Tam Leshad, in History of the Saints, in the Moral Juif, in the Setsul d'Origine de Christianisme, in my first volume, Theologia, and above all, in Em Lamikra. Rabbi Bן-אמוזג wrote about Shadal heterodoxy in a series of articles, Judaismo Anti-Kabbalistico, Anti-Kabbalistic Judaism, published in Vasilis Relitico in 1895. An analysis of some letters from corresponding with Shadal was published in 1966 in Rassegna Mensile of Israel, Un filone shadaliano in Artom, a Shadalian vein in Artom, question, by Rav Roberto Bonfield, now Professor Bonfield, who wrote so that in a kind of apparent contrast, Artom, developing Luzzatto, ends up in a certain sense remaining within the framework of so-called orthodoxy, from which it must honestly be recognized that Shadal, all in all, is out. The article, The Benefits of Tradition. In 1868, Rabbi Bן-אמוזג published an article in Educatore Israelita with the title I benefici della tradizione, the benefits of tradition. From the outset, our author clarifies the purpose of the article. There is an argument is particularly suited to all those who, while admitting the divinity of Scripture, doubt or discredit the tradition, and this is what is deduced from its benefits. Rabbi Bן-אמוזג explained many Torah laws taken literally cannot be understood. So any person with a little sense is forced to reintegrate the concept of Mosaic by including tradition. Rabbi Bן-אמוזג gives some examples explaining that a simple enumeration of facts is enough to achieve his purpose. Here we quote some of the passages of this article. According to the superficial sense of the text, one must tear an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, which is to say the law of retaliation in all its crude and ugly nakedness. An absurd law, since it does not reach intent or goes beyond it, the eyes not being in each person of the same value. According to the oral Torah, the penalty is pecuniary, is monetary, and proportional to the damage caused. And finally, tradition proclaims a principle of pikuach nefesh. It is a prevalence of human life over the observance of on any mitzvah except idolatry, bloodshed, and fornication, so much that the Karaites hesitated for a long time before accepting the principle, and that finally they did it at the cost of a contradiction. Rabbi Bן-אמוזג concluded by saying that the oral Torah was reserved for the people of Israel. Others also have the written Torah, which Rabbi Bן-אמוזג calls the father, the book. We have at the same time a father, the book, and a mother, the tradition. One of the commentaries on the Torah, Rabbi Bן-אמוזג, was entitled En Lamikra, the mother of the scripture, and was also dedicated to refuting the internal and external enemies of the Torah. A legal opinion on Samama will was published in 1882. Even in a work of this type, that was meant as a legal opinion for an Italian court, Rabbi Bן-אמוזג found a way to criticize Shadal by stating if there was a strictly observed prohibition, it was the one of putting in writing to fix in dead and immobile formulas what was to be transmitted with only the living word from teacher to more to Talmid. Not as some understood, and among them our Professor Luzzatto, that it was also in order to be allowed to proceed consciously and deliberately with reforms as times and change conditions suggested. Then we have a 5-lecture of Shavuot, 1886. This booklet in Italian collected 5 darashot on the holiday of Shavuot. The main topic of the darashot is the importance of the oral Torah. The written and oral law were given together from Sinai and cannot be separated. The teaching of the masters cannot be separated from those of Moshe. In the first darashah, Bן-אמוזג writes, tradition and scripture are like an apple that cannot be divided. Moses is the seed, the masters are the tree, the leaves, the flowers, and the fruits. He adds, so here is a theme that I set out to deal with today, the unwritten but traditional part of the history of the Sinaitic revelation. And so he continues talking about the opportunity of recognizing here once again the truth of tradition by observing how well it fills the gaps of the scriptural word, how it gives prominence and light to the darkest passages. Scripture and tradition are the sources I turn to in order to have a complete history of what happened in that great day. A midrashic source tells that when arrived under Mount Sinai, the children of Israel say they would gladly accept a written Torah, but as far as the oral Torah was concerned, they should think about it. Whereupon the Creator placed Mount Sinai on them like a barrel, threatening to crush them. The reason for this coercive action is explained by Rabbi Ben-Amozeg. Accepting Scripture without accepting a tradition at the same time, it is the same as accepting nothing. That everyone is the master of understanding it as he pleases, that everyone can put in everything that suits him best. The date of the day when the people of Israel received the Torah, Mount Sinai, is not written in the Torah. According to the literal text of the Torah, the holiday of Shavuot is a country festival, an agricultural and nothing but agricultural festival. Do you know who reveals the date of the revelation? The tradition. In the second derashah, Ben-Amozeg teaches us the meaning of the verse, and Israel camped there in front of the mountain. How many things are contained in this verse? The Master taught us that the people were one of heart, interest, inspiration, and they were already in blood and origin. What is the significance of this teaching? Rabbi Ben-Amozeg writes, revelation must be looked at, understood, interpreted, not with the eyes, not with the mind of the individual, but with those of the nation, not with a dissolute, egoistic, schismatic criterion of every single intellect, but with a common, collective, synthetic of the people, of all times, of all places. In other words, gentlemen, with tradition rather than free examination. Before the revelation, the individual must disappear and remain the people to whom God spoke from a mountain, to whom he transmitted his mitzvot, the people who transmitted them to the next generation, and this one to the next up to the present day, the true, unique, legitimate meaning in which the word of God sounded the first time at their ear and their intellect. Without the oral tradition that we preserve, no one will be able to read the Torah because it is known punctuation is missing in the Torah text, and countless words can be read in different ways and completely change the meaning of the text. Letters to Luzzatto, this little booklet published in 1890. While the ideological clash between Ben-Amozeg and Luzzatto was violent, Ben-Amozeg never failed to demonstrate respect for Luzzatto, who was, among other things, more than 20 years older than him. In the first letter of November 1857, he called his Pregiatissimo Signore ed Amico, and signed Devotissimo Ben-Amozeg. In another letter dated March 12, 1859, he wrote, Dearest and most esteemed friend, and signed by writing, your always affectionate and devoted friend of yours. Rabbi Ben-Amozeg wrote, he never failed to deal with Shadal with the affection and love he deserved. Despite this, he remained very critical of some of Shadal's writing. As a conclusion, Rabbi Ben-Amozeg was a descendant of the rabbinical family and a man of brilliant intellect. In 1858, at the age of 35, he had already written commentaries on the Torah, Tehillim, Targum Onkelos, and Pirkei Avot. The time in which he lived did not allow him to continue in this direction, because the social and ideological changes in Western Europe and in Italy were such that within a few years one could well fear that there would be no need for Talmidei Chachamim. The situation called for an emergency solution, and Ben-Amozeg realized he had to change course. The year 1852, when the Vikuach of Shadal against the Kabbalah was published, represented the turning point of Rabbi Ben-Amozeg. He saw that the controversy against the Kabbalah hid a much more serious danger, that against the whole oral Torah. After the publication of Matmah Gia, the great majority of works of Ben-Amozeg was written in defense of the oral tradition. In trying to understand who Rabbi Ben-Amozeg was, we must consider that in Italy he had to fight for the defense of tradition against the school of Shadal, which also in deference to the conservative of its leader, Shadal, who was opposed to the changes introduced by reformers in Germany, was liberal more in ideas than in practice. In this respect, Rabbi Ben-Amozeg had more difficulty defending the attacks against the tradition than Rabbi Hirsch had in Frankfurt. If in Germany it was easy to show the excesses of the reformists to Jews who remained faithful to the Torah, in Italy it was difficult to show to an audience whose Jewish interests were waning that the ideas of Padua school, which was officially Orthodox, were leading away from the observance of the Torah. Rabbi Ben-Amozeg feared that the spread of the idea of Padua school would further distance Italian Jews from Torah and mitzvot. For this reason, from mid-50s onward, he dedicated his life to fighting the Padua school. He changed the direction of his studies and became an apologist and polemicist. In his half-century of activity, Rabbi Ben-Amozeg was the most profound and prolific thinker of Jewish Italy and left dozens of works and writings from which we can still profit greatly today. He was a master of two generations of Italian Jews, and many of his works are still studied 120 years after his death. The life of Rabbi Ben-Amozeg was dedicated to teaching Torah to his Talmidim and to his community. Following the illustrious chains of predecessors, he taught us how to behave like Jews, and above all, how to think like Jews. He faithfully transmitted to us the teaching of the masters. He tried with his writings to help people to improve themselves and to his way to improve the world. עד שיבוא שילה במהרה בימינו אמן.